A lot of people think that processing stock is basically donkey work, it's stuff that you don't ever want to do. And if you know how to do it right, that's just not the case. So we're going to take this board, which is just been skip planed, it's rough on the other side, and we're going to bring it all the way up to basically S4S and show you how to do it with a minimum amount of effort. It's not as difficult as people think it is, and that's because you got to have the right tools. And the right tool is a jack plane. So this plane is about 14 inches long. We have an iron on it that has a camber, like a 10-inch radius curve on it. And that's going to allow us to take out a big bite when we need to. The next thing is that we're not going to use it parallel with the grain, like you see a lot of people doing planing this way. That's only part of the jack plane's job. A lot of the times it can be used across the grain. This is called traversing, and that allows you to flatten the work. So I always at least, like to start on the bark side of the board. So this is the part that's facing outside towards the bark, outside of the tree. And you can tell that by looking at the annular rings on the end. And the reason I start on the bark side is when the tree dries, when the wood dries at the kiln, it's going to curl up like this. So these two long edges are high. And so we want those two high edges, this edge and this edge, because those serve as sort of a reference surface for the plane. And if we started on the other side, which will have just sort of a hill, the plane will just ride over the hill. This will take these high spots down to the low spot in the middle. So the first thing we need to do is bevel off this far corner, because when we traverse across the board, we don't want to spelch out this corner. And so now we just work right across the grain. Couple things is working across the grain allows you to take a much thicker chip than working with the grain. So you can take a big bite without any effort. The other thing is notice that I'm not moving my arms. I'm just rocking my body back and forth. Now, if this were the underside of a tabletop or the back of a cabinet that I was processing by hand, this would be the surface I would leave once I got it flat. It's a nice rippled surface. It's what you see on traditional work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the plane along and see if I've taken out these two high spots. And it looks pretty good, but what I'm going to do just to make sure they're down is take a couple with the grain passes where the high spots are. And you can use the side of your plane as a straight edge. So we can see that when we get to this point, we know that it is pretty, coplanar in a lot of places. But what we don't know is if either of these corners are high, if the board is warped, twisted, or inwined. And so to determine that, we use what are called winding sticks. And these are fancy winding sticks. It's just two straight lengths of wood. You can pick them up off your shop floor. And these will exaggerate any twist in the board. So what I'm doing is I'm going to bob my head up and down here, and I'm going to watch the lines on that board to see if both ends disappear at the same time. So I'm just bobbing up and down. So what I'm looking for is I'm trying to see if this corner and this corner disappear behind this bar at the same time. What I'm seeing is that this is disappearing first and this is disappearing second. So what that means is this corner is high and this corner is high, because trees respond predictably. They twist predictably. So they corkscrew. Almost all trees do. Now, trees can be kind of weird. So occasionally you'll get one that just has a corner up. So we have two high spots, essentially. Now, when we worked across the grain, we were trying to remove the high spots here and here. When we're going to remove twist, we're going to remove the high spots here and here. So we work diagonally. A lot of handwork is just taking high spots down to low spots. If you can find the high spots, then you can take them down to the low, and you're done. Now, I'll be honest with you, you get pretty good at telling if a board is twisted just by eye. So winding sticks are a bit of a kludge, and that did it. But they're a really good teaching tool for teaching your eye to see when a board is twisted. So this board has 4 corners that are all now in plane. So now I can decide what I'm going to do with this board. I can flatten it with my jointer plane and bring it to a real flat surface, which is what I can do, or I could just leave it with that jack plane surface. But we're going to assume that this is going to be used like a shelf or a side or something like that. I'm not worried too much about tear out. The jointer plane's job is mostly just to bring all the surfaces in line and make them relatively smooth, and then the smoothing plane is going to finish the job. So sometimes I'll check it again to see if I cupped it, if I made it hollow, which is a very common defect, and I did. So I'm just taking down those 2 high spots, and now I've got a nice flat surface. Maybe just a little in the middle there. Yeah. Now, keep in mind, this is all going to be flattened with a smoothing plane, so this surface is not the finished surface. This looks pretty gnarly to me. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get a true edge. So we have one true face, so we're going to put it in the face vise. And then I'm going to make this edge 90 degrees to this face. So if it's rough like this is now, I'm going to start with a jack. Remove any fur. Okay. Then I just grab a tri-square. I'm going to put the butt of the tri-square, the handle, against the true face. And I'm going to see what my edge looks like. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but this corner that is toward me is high, and the corner that is facing the bench is low. So to fix that, I just need to scoot my jack plane toward me so that the high part of the curve, the strong part of the curve, is taking off the high spot on the edge. And once I get it close, and that is really close, then I can finish it up with the jointer plane. One more. There we go. Nice and true. So I'm going to make a mark on here, and that's called the caret, and that means that's a true edge. And then I'm going to put a mark on the face, which looks like this, sort of a curlicue, and that means true face. So that is a reminder that whenever I need to find a 90-degree angle at which to put a square against for laying out joinery or whatnot, that this is the true face and that's the true edge. Next up, what I would do is I would rip this. So why don't we go ahead and do that? Just rip it to final width. Now you can rip a variety of ways and lay out the rip a variety of ways. I have usually used a panel gauge, which is like a giant marking gauge, but I don't have my panel gauge with me. So what we're going to do is we're going to do what's a kludge, but it works really well. So I'm just going to mark it manually. So let's say we want to make this board 9 inches wide. So I'm going to make a mark there at 9. Remember, these are all off of the true face. Looks good. And the true edge there. So I'll make it's almost long enough, so we'll make a third mark. It's okay to use ink if that's easier for you to see. The Japanese use ink for everything in woodworking. All right, so that's what we're going to rip away. Now, I could jack that away with my jack plane, but instead that's so much to remove that I'm going to use a small rip saw. So this is just a panel saw that has about 8 or 9 teeth per inch, filed rip. And carpenters will rip down on those saw benches, but cabinet makers think that's pretty crude. So what we're going to do is what's called overhand ripping. So we're going to start on the line, make a nice long curve with the saw nice and low, just like we did before. And I'm going to make one small modification here. Sometimes I forget when I have metal dogs I can do this. This is one of the things I like about metal dogs. So you can use the snouts of the dogs to hold the work down. And much more stable ripping environment. And then once the cut started, then you start moving the saw up to make it aggressive. Now, if you do get offline a little bit, and I am getting a little bit offline there, normally I wouldn't sweat it because I'm going into the waste. But if I am sweating it, I will lay the saw down into the kerf and nibble away, and once again create a nice long kerf, and then go back to the overhand rip. As you get to the end of the board, you need to take it easy because you can easily split this whole thing off and it'll split off back here. So that's why I grab it with one hand. So now we have a true face, a true edge. The second edge is parallel to the first. So we can come over here in our face vise. And finish it off to the line. All right. So this isn't considered a true edge. I mean, it might be, but we don't know. So we're just going to still call this our true edge. So now we have face, 2 edges done, and so we need to do this rough surface. How do you do that? Well, you start with your marking gauge, and you set it to either the finished thickness that you know you need to have, if it's 3/4, 7/8, whatever. Or if you're going for maximum thickness, you sort of probe around the board to find the lowest spot, which I just did, which is right there. And notice that I've got the head of the gauge working against the true face. So what I'm trying to create is a parallel line, a line that is parallel to the true face all the way around the two long edges and two ends. Good. Right. Now, basically all that's left is to work down to this gauge line. And I'm going to put this gauge line here and here. Make it easy on myself to see. And the problem with this face is, as I mentioned before, it has this kind of bow to it. And if I just traverse across this bow, I won't make it flat. I will just make it bowed but thinner. So there's a couple things you need to do. First thing is you get your jack out. And what we want to do is we want to jack out the middle. We want to jack out the middle down to this line and down to this line so that we create that cupped surface that we had on the other surface. Almost there. Now I have a couple choices at this point. I can simply continue to do what I'm doing. I could keep working these down to those lines, and that'd be fine. Or if I have a lot of material to remove, which I don't actually, I probably would do exactly what I just suggested, which is just continue to work with the grain. But let's say I had to remove a 1/4 inch of material. Then I go back to this. And I would keep doing that until I reached the low spot there. But as I mentioned, the easier thing with this board is just to continue using the jack with the grain. And that's really all there is to it. And you can stop at any time when you can put it into a planer, for example. So with a lot of wide boards, if my jointer isn't wide enough, I'll jack one side flat and then put it through the thicknesser. All right. So now the rest is up to whatever this board requires. I did sweat a little bit. Must be out of shape. You know, if this needs to become the outside of a project, I'm going to take the joiner plane and the smoothing plane and finish it up. If it's an internal piece, that's probably all it really needs. But as you can see, it's not hard to make boards flat, and it's not hard to make a big honking mess.